Again, the discourse today is on letting go of the past and manifesting miracles in 2020. And some of you might think there's a little divergence between those two things, but at the end of the discourse, I'll link up how manifesting miracles is intimately tied up into letting go of the past. Letting go of the past. Why is that so important? For a lot of us, the past is really how we live our lives. We invest a lot of thought in the past. We invest a lot of emotion in the past. And really, the past, because of that, is the molding ground for our present. There is a Buddhist story, which many of you may be familiar with, in part because I've shared it before, but you might know about it on your own. But this Buddhist story has a lot to do with letting go of the past. And because it's so instructive, I wanted to share it with everybody today. So here's how the story goes. There are two Buddhist monks. There's an elderly monk and a young monk. And they're traveling together to a particular location. And as they're traveling along, they come to a river. And it's a fairly fast-moving river. And on the banks of the river, they come across a young, beautiful woman. And the woman addresses the two monks, and she says, "I don't think I can make it across this river by myself. Is there any way that one or both of you can assist me in getting across the river?" So the two monks, after hearing this, they look at each other. And they know that they have taken a vow not to touch women. So after a little while, the elderly monk goes over and he picks up the woman. He puts her on his shoulders and walks her across the river to the other side and sets her down. The young monk cannot believe what the elderly monk just did. Because of that vow that they were not to touch women. So he walks across the river, gets to the other side, and without saying anything, the two monks continue on their travels. Now, for the next several hours, the young monk, he cannot get out of his mind the fact that the elderly monk touched this woman and carried her across the river. He cannot believe the elderly monk broke his vow. He's judging the elderly monk, making conclusions, and this is occupying his mind and his very being for several hours. Finally, the young monk, he can't take it anymore. And he addresses the senior monk and he says, "Why did you do that? I can't believe you picked up that woman and took her across the river." And the elderly monk paused and turned around and he looked back at the younger monk and he said, "Well, I did pick her up and I carried her across the river, but I set her down on the other side of the river. You have been carrying her for the last several hours." So the message here to the young monk was that he was living in the past. Yes, the elderly monk, for a moment, broke the vow and took her across the river, but when he was done carrying her, he let her go. And the past was no longer of concern to him, and he was living in the present. Why is it so difficult for us, for many of us humans, to let go of the past? Well, perhaps the most obvious reason is that it is very, very difficult to let go of the past. The easier path to take is to hold on to it, and to hold on to it with all our might, because we feel it is a part of us, and if we let go, then we are going to lose a part of us, And also, if we let go, we're not going to know what's going to happen. There's a bit of the unknown there. This difficulty in letting go of the past is demonstrated by another story, which I wanted to bring up. This is another, if anybody is familiar with the Christian tradition, it's a very well-known story in the Christian faith, and it has a lot of different purposes for why it's told. One of those purposes is, though, about letting go of the past. So what's the story I'm talking about? If anybody wants to read it out of the Bible, it's in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 8, and it starts around verse 7. So what's happening here is Jesus he's given a sermon. And when he's done with the sermon, all of the people and Jesus go back to a temple. And the Pharisees, they don't like Jesus. They think that Jesus is not following the law, in fact, is breaking the law, and they really don't want anything to do with him. So when he gets back to the temple, they start questioning him. And one of the things they did was they brought up a woman. And they said, "We caught this woman in an act of adultery." And the law, according to Moses, says that this woman must be stoned to death. What do you say, Jesus? So what the Pharisees were trying to do was to trick Jesus. But what he said was, "For any of you who have not sinned, you can cast the first stone at this woman." So this caught the Pharisees off guard and a lot of the other people off guard. And as the story goes, one by one the people left because they realized that they were not without sin and they could not be the ones to cast the stone at the woman. Traditionally, this woman's often thought of as Mary Magdalene. And it doesn't really matter if she was Mary Magdalene or not. It's not really said that in the Bible, but traditionally that's how she's thought of, the prostitute who came to follow Jesus. But irrespective of whether she's Mary Magdalene or just a woman who committed adultery, this is where we're getting to the point of letting go of the past. So Jesus, as the story goes, he's drawing symbols on the ground in the sand. And the woman comes over and says to him, this is after all the people have left, she says, "Rabbi, what am I supposed to do now?" And Jesus stopped drawing in the sand and he looked at her and he said, "Just don't do it again." And then she left. So this instruction by Jesus is so simple, but so hard to put into practice. So if you've done something which you're not proud of, our first inclination is to what? Go over it and over it and over it again in our head and to beat ourselves up. Is that what Jesus said to this woman? He didn't say to her, "All right, you've committed adultery. Now what I want you to do is spend the next hours or days or weeks or months thinking about it, beating yourself up about it, feeling guilty about it, thinking you are less than because of it, and then let it go." No, he simply said, "Just don't do it again." Meaning, let it go immediately, live in the present, be in the present, and go forward. Because if you don't do that, the past will always be an anchor. You will never be able to go up the mountain of enlightenment if you are bound to the past. And this brings us to another reason why it is so difficult for a lot of people to let go of the past. And it has to do with their capacity for forgiveness. Forgiving themselves, forgiving other people, forgiving situations. People who are very adept at forgiveness are not people who live in the past. I've said this before during other discourses, and this was an analogy that a famous mystic brought up in one of his books, Emmett Fox. He analogized this connection we have to the past like, think of a spider's web and the lines in the spider's web. And what he says is, if you fail to forgive yourself and forgive other people and forgive situations in the past, you're just like a spider, and you're building this spider's web with all these sticky components to it. And basically, you're locking yourself into a box because of the lack of forgiveness, which you cannot get out of. You're stuck there, like anything which goes into the web. And if that's what happens to you, you're never going to achieve enlightenment. Forgiveness is so important that it is part of every major religion, and I suspect it's part of every religion in one form or another. We know it's part of all Christian traditions, because in the Lord's Prayer, one of the parts of it is, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive others who trespass against us. The importance of that part of the Lord's Prayer is this acknowledgement that unless you forgive yourself and forgive others, you will not be able to progress on the path. It's part of the Ho'oponopono practice, which we teach here at the Spirit of Lotus, which it's essentially this mantra, which you are saying, I love you, please forgive me, I forgive myself, thank you. But two of those parts I just mentioned have to do with forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of the most important things that we can work on during our lifetime if we truly and really want to escape from the past. Another reason why it is so difficult to let go of the past has to do with our capacity for love. So what do I mean by that? With unconditional love, there is all possibility. And have you ever met anybody who loved themselves unconditionally, loved other people unconditionally, loved all of God's creation unconditionally, who were stuck in the past? Who thought about the past all the time, who were emotionally bound to the past? I would suggest that if you really are unconditional in your love, that would not happen to you. There is a little quote when I was contemplating this discourse this morning, which I wanted to share with people. And this is from that gentleman, Emmett Fox, again. And this talks about the power of love. I know this is in one of his books, and I apologize, I don't know which book it's from. But I'm sure if you look up Emmett Fox and love, you'll find it online. So here's what he says. There is no difficulty that enough love will not conquer. No disease that love will not heal. No door that enough love will not open. It makes no difference how deep set the trouble, how hopeless the outlook, how muddled the tangle, how great the mistake. A sufficient realization of love will dissolve it all. If only you could love enough, you would be the happiest and most powerful being in the world. So love is, as they say, using the cliche, a key. And it is one of the keys to letting go of the past. Part of the problem with not everybody, but a lot of people who are bound to the past is they're constantly trying to reconstruct it. And the excuse they do there is so they can learn from it. So for instance, something happens in the past, maybe you have an argument with a loved one, and you're not proud of what you said. So you run the reel over and over in your mind, that argument, and you think to yourself, if only I had said this, if only I had thought that, if only I had acted in this fashion, then things would have been different. The problem with that type of tie to the past is that the past is the past. It will never come back. You will never be able to change it. It is what it is. Really, all of us innately know if we have done something which we feel is immoral, unethical. I've run across very few people who really don't have a sense of what is right and what is wrong. So you have this immediate realization of something you've done or said or thought, and whether it's right or wrong. And it's really those first few moments that are so important. I call these the golden moments. In these first few moments, are you going to tie yourself to what you've said or thought or done and replay it in your mind, or are you going to let it go? Realize, let's say if it was wrong, realize that it was wrong, and make the commitment immediately that you will not do that again, and move on. It is only by doing that that we set ourselves free, frankly. We have to own what we've said, thought, or done, make the immediate realization of whether it's right or wrong, love ourselves enough to move on, forgive ourselves enough to move on, and set ourselves free. Because if we don't, we will never, ever go through that eye of the needle. So the other part of the discourse today has to do with manifesting miracles in 2020. And so some of you might be thinking, well, what does that have to do with letting go of the past? Well, I would postulate that if you can't let go of the past, you will not be able to manifest miracles. And let me give some examples as to why that is true. Because of the past, many of us were limited. We've limited it ourselves. We are spirit experiencing in a human body, but we are all possibility. But very, very few of us actually believe that. Some of us can intellectually accept it, but we don't believe it, and we don't have faith in it. And part of this is our parents, our friends, society, and even ourselves put limits on what we can do and what we can achieve. Really think for a moment, how many of us think we can do anything without limitation? Once you find a person who really believes that, you are going to find a person who can manifest miracles. They're not bound by this physical world. They're not bound by the duality of this physical world. Another thing is, because of the past and conditioning and what we've been taught and what we've been told, how many of us really believe that there is no separation between us? That I am that chair in front of me and that chair is me. That I am everybody that's listening to this service and everyone listening to this service is me. No separation. We are, in reality, as we say all the time here at the Spirit of Lotus, all of us are co-creators with God. Every single person. This physical environment around us is a manifestation of what we think and what we believe and what we have faith in. Physical manifestation is what? We take all possibility and we limit it by our mind, and then it turns into the physical reality. So if in our mind we have these limits, if in our mind we do not accept that we are all possibility, that we are unified with everything that exists, that by moving my very hand I can move this chair because that chair is me, then we will not be able to manifest miracles. What are we paying attention to? That's another subject we talk about a lot here at the Spirit of Lotus. What you pay attention to is what you energize in your life. And what you energize in your life is what becomes reality. If you are spending your attention on the past, that is what you are energizing, the past. The same goes for the future. If your attention is on the future and that's where your energy is going, then it's all there and not in the present. Reverend Daniel last week talked about if you want to let go of the past and you want to achieve miracles, you have to live in the present. And that is the truth. That is where your attention must be, in the presence. In reality, we are limitless. We are all potential. We are everything that exists. And once we accept that, not only intellectually, but believe it with all of our heart and soul, then we can manifest miracles. We all have this capability. We call things miracles because we think we can't do them, right? We think people are incapable of whatever the miracle is, and so when it happens, then it's a miracle. But the reality of the situation is that we are all capable of doing it. Nothing really is a miracle in that sense. It's just a manifestation of our all possibility. So with that, we have about 10 minutes or so for a deep level meditation.